Have you been jolted awake by a sudden rush of warmth in your body, palpitations, a pounding in your head, fast breathing, a sense of alarm? If so, you've been experiencing what we call insomnia adrenaline surges. And this is the video on the World Wide Web that will give you all the information and resources that you need to free yourself from them so you can sleep in a peaceful way. In this episode, we're going to talk about the two most common types of insomnia adrenaline surges. We're going to see why they happen, and most importantly, how they fade away. Let's take a look. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a sleep physician turned sleep coach and online educator, and I'm so glad that you're here to learn about adrenaline surges in insomnia because they can be very, very bothersome. I often get questions about these adrenaline surges, so glad you're here. And as mentioned in the intro, we are going to break this class up into 3 sections. We're going to talk about the most common surges, types of surges, or timing of surges, maybe I should say, when it comes to insomnia. And then we're going to look at why they happen. And that is really key. I think that's actually the most helpful part of this lesson is why they happen. And naturally, when we've seen why they happen, we'll also see how they fade away. Now, let's get right into it. So there are 2 very common timings, let's say, of these adrenaline surges that I often hear about. And the first one we can call the wake-sleep transition surge, or the wake-to-sleep adrenaline surge. And what happens in this scenario is that we are, in our bed, our eyes are closed, and we're just about to drift off into sleep when we have that adrenaline surge, and it just jolts us awake. As we're transitioning from wakefulness to sleep, we have this adrenaline surge that wakes us up, and this can happen in a repetitive manner. We wake up, and then some moments later, we're about to fall back asleep again, and then we have another surge, and this can be quite a difficult, repetitive cycle of surges, if you will. The other common surge I often hear about is the middle of the night surge. And this is when we often have the impression that it was actually the surge that woke us up. We just jolted awake, and we are in this surge of adrenaline with like that warmth, feeling flushed, heart is beating, sense of alarm, pounding head, maybe breathing fast, jitteriness, shakiness, all these things. And again, we can kind of sense that they woke us up, which is not exactly what happens. But these are the 2 most common adrenaline surges in insomnia: the wake to sleep transition adrenaline surge and the middle of the night adrenaline surge. And you may now thinking that's not exactly what I described. For most in the audience, I believe that you will say, yeah, I've experienced one of those. But if, quote unquote, your surge isn't one of these, if it happens maybe during the day or in some other context, or the timing is different from what I described, then please know that whatever we're going to talk about in this lesson, it applies to all the adrenaline surges. It applies to all of them, regardless of the timing and the context. So now we talked about when we experience them, and we've seen that there are 2 very common versions. We want to understand why they happen, and this it can be very mysterious, right? It can be an odd experience, and whenever something is strange to us, mysterious, mystical, then it adds to our sense of kind of like going through something strange, and that keeps us in a state of fear, which you can see that leads to more adrenaline surges. So we want to clarify as much as possible, right? So here's the key thing. Adrenaline is released when threat or opportunity is perceived. I think this is it sounds like maybe very, very obvious, but I think that this is key to realize, that when you are walking across the street and a bus is coming towards you, you will have an adrenaline surge. You may not even notice it because it's in context. So it's natural for you to have this, like if you feel hot, flushed, your brain's like going 100 miles per hour, you're not going to be like, why is this happening? Because you're going to be like, of course it's happening, because a bus is going to hit me, but you have an adrenaline surge there, and that propels you to come up with an idea, and you jump out of the way and you're good, right? But my point here is that surge of adrenaline, it comes from our brain perceiving something as a threat or an opportunity. Let's say, you're playing sports and you're playing soccer and somebody passes you the ball, and you see that I can score. There's also going to be an adrenaline surge there, right? Because you perceive a great opportunity, right? But my point here is that really we think of adrenaline as this stress hormone that is released from the adrenal glands. But in a way, the adrenal glands are just like a conduit. In a way, we can see that adrenaline is truly released by our brain. And the adrenals are just, again, conduits. They're just part of this process. But the decision whether to release adrenaline, produce an adrenaline surge or not, is taken in the brain. And this is really, really key because of the following. If we think that the problem is that there's just too much adrenaline in our bloodstream, the adrenals release too much adrenaline for no particular reason, and we look at that level, the adrenal gland level, that we're not really seeing where the adrenaline surge truly comes from. And we can get stuck in another loop where we think we're just so focused on the fact that we're having these adrenaline surges that we think they're the problem. Like, the problem is just that I have these adrenaline surges. And guess what happens now is that they start to appear as a threat to us, as something that's dangerous, something that shouldn't be happening. And then the fact that we have adrenaline surges keeps us in a state of hypervigilance and fright. And then we have more of them. And that can become kind of a loop of its own. But if we see, on the other hand, that it is our interpretation of circumstance that matters, this is the adrenal surges are a result of our perception of circumstances, perception of events, how we think about things, our beliefs. Now we are at a level that really, really helps. Now we have clarity, and from clarity, true change can come. Now, to contextualize this to what we just talked about, how adrenaline is really released from the brain rather than the adrenals, let's contextualize that to our two most common versions of the insomnia adrenaline surges for complete clarity here. So firstly, the transitional adrenaline surge, it happens as we are drifting into sleep or about to go to sleep. And the thing is that when we are, just like resting in our bed or watching TV or something like that, we want to be awake. At least when we're watching TV, it's fine that we're awake, right? And even if you're kind of just resting at night, it's fine that we're awake. We're not bothered by it. But the moment that we're about to fall asleep, and if we've been in a state of like hoping to fall asleep, like really wanting to sleep, been afraid of being awake, now this is the moment that fear can surface. So we can be like, in a pretty peaceful state of mind, and then we notice that I'm about to fall asleep, and then we go like, our thought becomes like, what if I don't? What if I wake up? What if I don't transition to sleep? And that's that moment when a threat is detected by our brain or perceived by our brain. Our brain thinks that there is a potential problem here. And guess what? When our brain identifies a potential problem, what's it going to do? It's going to have the adrenals push out adrenaline to make us prepared to face a threat. So the moment when we're about to drift into sleep and we somehow think, what if I don't sleep? What if I don't drift off? What if something interrupts this process? That can lead to that adrenaline surge, right? So that explains why we have this adrenaline surge. That can happen over and over again. We can be fully awakened and like, oh, now I'm awake again. This is not what I wanted, but I guess I'm awake now. Okay, and then we're resting, and then we're just about to drift into sleep again. And like, what if I don't fall asleep again? And then we have another adrenaline surge again, all related to how our brain interprets the situation. Now, the middle of the night adrenaline surges can be a little trickier to see why they happen, because again, we can have this experience that I'm just woken up by an adrenaline surge. But that's not really what happens. What happens is that we normally, typically, physiologically have multiple awakenings per hour of sleep. They're just there for us to wake up, scan the environment, make sure there's nothing going on. And if we don't identify any problem, then we fall back asleep and we don't even remember having woken up. This is just an evolutionary thing. These awakenings are there to make sure we're safe, even in a vulnerable state when we're not so reactive, right? So what can happen though is when not sleeping has been thought of as a threat, as a danger, then we can have this normal physiological awakening. So we wake up to typical normal, but then our brain goes like, wait, I'm awake. This shouldn't be happening. Oh no, I'm awake. And then because our brain identifies this normal awakening as a threat, it sends the signal to the adrenal to like push out adrenaline, and here we go, right? Adrenaline is pushed out and we have an adrenaline surge. And we think it woke us up, but in reality, we already had an awakening, and we reacted to that awakening in a way that released adrenaline into our bloodstream. So this explains this middle of the night awakening. So now you see why these adrenaline surges happen in the context of insomnia, and you probably can also already glean the answer to how they fade away. We already talked about how we don't want to think of this as like an adrenaline problem or an adrenal problem, but rather a consequence of how we think. And now we can see that when being awake at night is not a threat to us, and when these adrenaline surges are not perceived as a threat to us, they will fade away, because then there's no longer any reason for our brain to push out more adrenaline. And this context, this channel is really all about teaching our brain how not sleeping at night is not a threat. It may be something that we don't prefer that. We all want to sleep at night, right? But that's totally fine. We all have the preference to sleep at night, but we can have that preference for sleep and still not seeing not sleeping as a threat. We can have a preference to sleep, but if we happen to find ourselves awake, then we're like, I don't want this, but it's not a threat. It's not dangerous. It's just what's happening right now. And this is the way that insomnia ends in general, but it's also the way that these adrenaline surges fade away. And we call this process befriending. When it comes to insomnia as a whole, we talk about befriending wakefulness, which is like teaching ourselves that being awake at night is not a threat, but the same really applies to these adrenaline surges. And befriending has like 3 levels. Befriending at level 1 is intellectual, cognitively, just being conscious of the fact that adrenaline and an adrenaline surge is not dangerous. It cannot harm us. In fact, it's just part of our brain's or our body's way of protecting us. So intellectually, just seeing how they happen and that adrenaline surges are not dangerous, very, very helpful. That alone can lower our fear of them. And befriending at the second level, this is the level of experiential learning. Sometimes we understand cognitively that these adrenaline surges are not harmful, but we're still, harboring this kind of fear of them. And that can be when the experiential learning really, really leads to the shift that we want. And what I mean with this is experiencing the adrenaline surge without attempting to control it, make it stop, or make it go away. So we have an adrenaline surge, and instead of our instinctive reaction, which may be to analyze what happened and try to stop it, prevent it from happening again, we go, I understand why this happened. Some adrenaline has just been released in my bloodstream. I don't need to do anything about this. That can really teach our brain that, there's nothing there that requires any adrenaline or any further response at all. That we are seeing that there's no threat. And finally, always the third level here, befriending ourselves, being kind to ourselves, being gentle with ourselves. So often the struggle is maintained by us thinking like, why is this happening? I should be over this. I've understood everything. I should be further along in these type of ideas, which are just self-criticism. And being kind and gentle with ourselves sounds fluffy, but it is what helps, again, more than anything I've ever come across. I hope this really clarified the adrenaline surges in the context of insomnia for you and sets you off on a path where they're no longer bothering you and no longer occur. But as always, let me know what you thought in the comment section, and we will go from there. See you in the next one. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you found the video you just watched really valuable. Now, I know how frustrating insomnia can be, especially if you are a high achiever, highly organized, a doer, a type A person who has figured out everything in life apart from sleep. Now, here's the thing. Although the wonderful traits you have can lead you to struggle with sleep, they're also the traits that can set you free. All you need to see how may be some personalized instruction. And you can get that in our Insomnia Immunity program. If you think it is time to set yourself free, to find peaceful sleep, to feel connected with the world again, and have color return to your life, then head over to thesleepcoachschool.com and join the Insomnia Immunity program. And we can't wait to see you on the other side.